Alrighty, going to continue with our discussion of the concepts of divine knowledge and human freedom. And particularly now, what I want to look at is the concepts of counterfactuals. Because when you read theological and philosophy of religion literature on this, the problem is a lot of times the terms are not defined and there's equivocation that goes on in the definition, which we'll get later. When we use the phrase the will of God, there's about 8 different ways that's actually understood in the scriptures and in theology. Same thing with the concept of counterfactual, which is what it sounds like at its basis. It's contrary to fact, okay? You have fact and something that is contra to it. But the way it's used in these discussions, you've got 2 senses of counterfactuals. One is counterfactuals, as mentioned before, as subjunctive conditionals, which are these if-then sorts of statements where if God ordains these particular circumstances and conditions, then he foresees you would do these kinds of things. And again, so that's the idea of a subjunctive conditional as a counterfactual. But another way that the word counterfactual is used in the literature is really the idea of the principle of alternative possibility in every instance of choice. Even though factually you chose X, the fact is you could have chosen Y or non-X. Okay? So that's the idea of principle of alternative possibility, or sometimes how counterfactuals of creaturely freedom. The libertarian says for you to be truly free, not only do you have to be not coerced or determined by some external efficient cause, but you also have to have the capacity for alternative possibility of choice. Otherwise, your freedom is not sufficient for proper praise and blame. So just a little bit on that, more on that when we get to our discussion boards on the concepts of freedom. But now let's move into a more proper understanding here of what are the various kinds of freedom that we really need to talk about. Because again, at an interdenominational Christian university, we've got again, various views that are within our own classroom, as well as among the faculty. But what we want to do is establish, there's the stuff that's outside the box, and there's the stuff that's inside the box. It's like when we get to Christology, there's going to be the inside the box, truly God, truly man, one person, 2 distinct natures. You got to do that for, orthodoxy, anything out that, debate it and, come up with what's best. When we get to this issue of the decree and free choice, there are going to be some things we minimally have to affirm. Anything else on that, great. Christians have at it, go have a nice, robust, smiling, loving discussion with your fellow Christians and others on this. So let's start with the very concept of determinism. And this is going to be important because when you talk about determinism philosophically, we really have to distinguish what's called hard determinism from soft determinism. Okay? Hard determinism, which is roughly starts on page 4 of the handout that I have, it says this: hard or absolute determinism is this. It says one event determines another if the latter is a consequence of or necessitated by it. So the idea is necessity, okay? So the idea here, additionally, every event or state of affairs is brought about by antecedent events or states of affairs in accordance with universal causal laws that govern the world. Hence, all types of determinism, hard and soft, okay, imply that the future is fixed and there's no possibility of alternative development. And that's important about the concept of determinism is that especially in a theological system, in a monotheistic theological system, the question is God's, again, very important, is God's decree certain to occur? Okay? So in other words, it's impossible to doubt that God's decree will in fact come to pass. Okay? And so we want to maintain that in our analysis. Why? Because of texts like Isaiah 46, because God says, what I have decreed will certainly come to pass. So the question is going to come down to the types of causation that are involved. What's important here is that for hard determinism, they just flat out say that freedom is an illusion. Okay? Everything is determined or caused by antecedent conditions, events, and causal powers. But the most important here that's going to distinguish hard determinism from what's called soft determinism, which is what's called compatibilism, is going to be this, is that with hard determinism, when you make, as an individual human being with the abilities to, with the power of thought and choice, is that thought and choice is actually an effect. It's the movement of your intellect and will. So the issue is what's the cause for the movement of the intellect and the will for every thought and choice? Okay, for true freedom, okay, we're going to maintain that you as the act agent with these powers or ability as a thinking substance is that you are the efficient cause, okay, of your thoughts and choices. And what's important here is I've got about 17 definitions of causation listed in my syllabus, but efficient causation is one of the most important ones to think about, because efficient causation is that which actually produces the effect. So it's not a material cause, it's not an impelling cause, it's not fill in the blanket of these other causes, it's what actually produces the effect. So what's important here to maintain any sense of genuine practical freedom, a hard determinist would say that ultimately your thoughts and your choices are produced by an immediate external efficient cause, okay? So in other words, that thought and choice was not actually produced by you. It was produced efficiently or effectively by something outside of yourself. Which, if that's true, then why in the world should you ever be praised for something or blamed for something when you did not actually do something good or do something evil? It was actually produced by something that's an external efficient cause. So this is why Christians generally will reject hard determinism, in the sense that even if you can argue it can never be otherwise, if your thoughts and choices are produced by an external efficient cause, then yeah, you cannot have practical freedom in any meaningful sense of God's rewarding you or punishing you for your choices. Okay, so hard determinism, no, that's pretty much out the window rationally. And so now we move into the concept of compatibilism. Now, compatibilist is a type of determinism that says, okay, determinism is correct in the sense that things can be rendered certain to occur in advance and they can't be otherwise, and yet that notion is compatible with practical freedom. So the compatibilist would say, yeah, fill in the blanks, everything else is true about determinism, but the individual human being making the thought or choice is in fact the efficient cause of his or her own thoughts and choices. Now, this is important because whether you are a libertarian, which we'll get to in a minute, a Molinist, or a compatibilist, no one is free from any, again, antecedent or previous conditions and circumstances, which might be called impelling causes and other types of causation. So, for example, the choices that we make right now and the thoughts that we have are all going to be based on what we've learned before. The choices that you can make right now, for example, I can't speak Swahili, but I can choose to learn to speak Swahili and then make a choice to speak it. So even the choices I make now are going to be conditioned on antecedent circumstances and conditions, which someone might say antecedent types of causes, okay? So more on that in a minute. So nobody is free from that, either in a libertarian view of choice or in a compatibilist view of choice. All of that, it comes prior. So with that now, let's move to the concept of libertarian choice. So what would a compatibilist affirm, first of all, as well? That the will is self-moved, that you as a human being are the efficient cause of your own thoughts and choices, that it's not an immediate, efficient external cause that's producing your thoughts and choices. And yet a compatibilist would say, yet there's no principle of alternative possibility in place. You cannot choose otherwise. The compatibilist would say, for you to choose otherwise, you would have deliberated otherwise. Okay? And that's how it works in compatibilism, when more on that later. A libertarian, okay, which is indicative of, again, some Roman Catholic views, Arminian views, where compatibilism is going to be found, for example, in the Calvinist or Reform views. The Arminians and Molinists, mostly Molinists, even though there's some compatibilist Molinists like Bruce Ware. What you've got with libertarianism is that, yes, the will is self-moved or self-caused, same thing with the intellect as its own efficient cause, and yet in each instance of free choice, there has to be the principle of alternative possibility of choice and arguably of thought. Because when you start talking about the alternative possibility, it's not just the choice, it's alternative deliberation as well, because choice goes with thought. So with that, okay, within the Christian camp, usually what you've got are libertarians, classically, who believe that for us to be free enough to be praised and blamed, that we've got to have the ability to choose otherwise, okay, the principle of alternative possibility. Or the compatibilists that say, no, it's sufficient for practical freedom that we make our own choices. We're the efficient causes of our own choices. And if we had deliberated otherwise, we would have chosen otherwise. Now, what's important is that whatever we choose is going to be in one-to-one correspondence with God's decree. Because we cannot, as Christians, forming a theological view on this, start thinking about free choice independent of the divine decree and how God is working this out in divine providence in the world. So again, if you're a secularist or an atheist, yeah, think about free choice all you want. If you're a Christian, you have to think about this in the context of the divine decree and divine providence. So that's why we started this with God saying, I have decreed it, and again, it'll surely come to pass. Events such as the cross, by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. Again, you nailed to the cross by the hands of godless men. Think about what we're doing with that. You've got permitted, decreed sins that are blamed as being sins, yet they're eternally decreed by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, because Peter calls them godless at that point. So this is why when we consider libertarian choice and compatibilism, that's always going to be in the context of the certainty of divine foreknowledge, okay? So next time what we'll do is we'll look at the concepts of open theism and how open theism might maintain libertarian freedom, but rejects the notion of the certainty of divine foreknowledge. Thanks.